Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about a recent announcement that has come from the BART Board of Directors. So, if you don't know, BART is the transportation system, like the train system that basically connects San Francisco and the rest of the surrounding Bay Area. I've used it a lot. I don't use it a lot right now, but sometimes I do. And basically, it's a service that's been in a huge deficit for a long time. It's been getting worse. This year, it's like an annual deficit of $400 million a year. And, there's been some like emergency state loans and other sources to help try to save the system. But it's gotten to the point now where they announced this plan that starting at the beginning of 2027, they're going to cut service by 63% overall, close a whole ton of stations. I'm going to flash the details on the screen for you, just like screenshotted from the BART website. So it's really bad. It's like a huge slashing of the network itself. Like only three of the five lines are going to really remain. Uh, and yeah, to me, that's like super disappointing because I think lots of people in this country know that, we need to fight climate change and build better public transit and rely less on emissions producing vehicles. But anyway, let's get more into the details of it, right? Like the reason BART is in this financial crisis is that there's been a big fall in ridership basically ever since COVID, right? Of course, everybody's, working from home for the most part, much less time needed to commute. But of course, San Francisco Bay Area, super tech heavy sector. Lots of people were in industries where even after the pandemic, they could continue to work from home. So, that meant less people riding it up until today. You've also got the problem of, there is crime on BART. I don't think it's that bad as some people make it out to be, but there is are true issues in terms of like crime and cleanliness, or at least the perception of it for sure, among a lot of people that discourage them from using it. And lastly, because it is running out of money, BART for some time has been doing something called deferred maintenance. So you'll hear this happening all the time in transit systems that are running out of money. What's one of the first ways they cut costs is they say like, oh, the normally scheduled maintenance that we do to keep the system running, we're going to start cutting back on that and pushing it back into the future. And ultimately, that causes more issues that end up being even costlier in the long term to fix. But if you have to save money in a moment, that is something, these agencies do. This is something that's happening, or, is happening a lot in Boston, but they're starting to fix it now. But either way, it's kind of bad in the BART system, and it's causing increasing delays and a lack of reliability that are causing people to turn from the system, right? And so that's how we get to the situation of a $400 million a year deficit. And again, with this plan, they're going to cut back service and also increase fare prices, also increase parking prices. So ultimately, there's no like history tells us every time that happens, the number of people who ride it are going to decrease, and then it's going to enter a spiral of decreasing ridership, decreasing revenue, until maybe the system doesn't exist or it's rescued in some way, intervening, right? And now I want to talk about another thing that's like kind of ridiculous when you consider the big picture, right? So the annual deficit of BART, $400 million. That's what's causing this huge issue. So a couple years back, the voters in Santa Clara County, which is where San Jose is, they approved $12.2 billion to be spent to basically hook BART up from northern San Jose around Berryessa all the way up to the Caltrain station down in San Jose. $12.2 billion is like currently being spent and funded right now on this project. And again, that might not be worth anything because if the whole system fails, then what is that $12 billion extension going to do, right? And so the issue is BART can't legally just move the money from that project to saving the entire system because that money is raised from Santa Clara County. And so they kind of, the structures of the law is they keep the funding in their own local project instead of the entire system. And the federal money that is involved is like legally relegated to construction as opposed to, maintenance and employee payroll, which is what the system needs overall right now to survive. And so, that's kind of the present state of the situation. I wanted to break it down into present, past, and then, what can we expect sort of in the future. A very similar analogous situation would be what was taking place with the New York City subways in the 1970s. Overall, New York City at that time was dealing with massive, municipal deficits. There wasn't enough money coming in. Wealthy people moving out to the suburbs. The inner city loses its funding. That's a much bigger conversation, right? Point is, at this time, the subways were in a really bad shape. There was a lot of crime, uncleanliness, graffiti that people didn't like. And so ridership went down a lot, also because people were living in the suburbs. They were choosing their car instead. That caused, them to raise the fare to try to keep themselves financially sustainable. A fare increase led ridership to decrease, which led to even more fare increases, which meant to more, decreases in ridership until the system was almost completely insolvent. And in the 1980s, though, with funding from like the federal level and also, from New York, they were able to really revamp the system and make it into like, it's got issues today, but it's much more successful than it was in the 1970s. Right. So I think that's just a really clear example of, a system that's falling into disrepair. It might have, PR issues like the BART has around crime and certain things like that. But that if you really invest in it, you can bring it back and make it fantastic, which is what we should do with BART. But what we had before BART was something called the Key Line. It's not really all of BART, but it was sort of the main system that connected Berkeley, Oakland, the areas a little south of Oakland up into San Francisco. It was streetcars, it was a train, all that sort of different stuff, right? Very, very popular, very well used in the 1930s, 40s, 1950s, right? People are moving out into the suburbs, they're getting into their automobiles, right? People aren't using the train so much anymore. So they were going on some financial hard times, and the system was bought up by this company called National City Lines. Now, from 1938 to 1950, National City Lines bought up like streetcar systems, train systems in 25 American cities. Now, who were the main investors, the owners in this company? Standard Oil of California, General Motors, Firestone Rubber, they make tires for cars, and a company that was in charge of like engineering for highways and stuff. So basically, this company bought up all these rail lines, these streetcar lines, and then tore them down and replaced them with buses, right? Because, streetcars are trains that run on electricity, but buses, run on gasoline that Standard Oil of California sells. GM is going to make the buses, Firestone is going to make the tires. And yeah, I mean, they got away with it. In 1949, there was a trial where they brought a bunch of these people to court. They found them guilty of monopolizing the sale of like buses and gasoline, but they did not find them guilty of like the larger accusation of trying to monopolize and destroy, public transit systems. And so with that lighter sentence, it was literally like a $5,000 fee for GM, which in today's money is $62,000 or like the cost of a GMC Sierra, right? And the treasurer of GM was fined $1. So yeah, they got away with it. And, that's not to underplay the fact that like there were larger structural issues of like highways were expanding. There was a lot of federal money in that and people liked their cars more. That's totally part of the picture, right? But anyway, this company, tore down all the, trains that were part of the Key Line. And then basically there was no rail transit system in the Bay Area for a long time until the 1960s, around when a lot of people started to push for a new system, largely to replace the Key Line and, expand it to much further out in the Bay Area. This became BART, the system we have today. When it was voted on, it was proposed for all of the counties in the Bay Area. San Mateo County, which is where I live, and Santa Clara County said no. They said, we've already got a train system running from San Francisco down the peninsula to us. We'll just keep that. It's fine. It's actually very funny. Like at that time, Santa Clara County, which is now like San Jose, the center of Silicon Valley, it was, pretty sparsely populated. It was actually a lot of like orange orchards. And really like the leaders of the city thought, what do we need a train for? Whatever's going to happen in sleepy San Jose. And, 10, 20 years later, that's where the Silicon Valley boom happened. And, if you compare just San Jose and the suburban sprawl and the highways and the fact that it's, doesn't really have a great downtown with San Francisco, which, it has its issues, but it's really lovely. I think it's one of the nicest cities around. And that's just because I think public transit really helped shape the city, so it was more walking friendly, more beautiful. And San Jose, voted out of that and kind of suffered, I think, the consequences in the end, with not having so cool of a downtown. But I digress. The train that runs from San Francisco down to San Mateo and Santa Clara County eventually became the Caltrain, which is what I generally use every day. And we'll discuss that a little bit later as like a model for what we could do with BART. But the point is that, as we can see, in the history of the Key Line, in the history of the New York City subway, what we're seeing with Boston now, just multiple times in America, everybody knows we don't fund our public transit systems here enough compared to other countries like in Western Europe or Japan. And so there's always this kind of cycle of systems starting to fall apart, falling into decay, people stop using them. And then, like, as the system's about to collapse, or maybe after it does, and after 10 years of people, realizing it kind of sucks without it, they decide to, like, spend a ton of money either to recover the system or, build it again, buy up the land again, do all the construction again at a much higher cost, 10 to 20 years later. So ultimately, like, I think that's the historical cycle that we've got to learn from and say the solution is to invest and make sure things are well maintained now and build on the system to really make it successful in the future, instead of waiting for things to collapse and spending a lot of money at the last moment. Anyway, what is on the board in terms of the future of the system, right? So earlier this year, I believe, or maybe the year before, there was a ballot measure proposed that would basically apply a sales tax of 1% to San Francisco County and then 0.5% in all the other counties that are in the Bay Area and are connected by BART. And this would basically, it would bring the system closer back to solvency. It wouldn't be like anything to really promote expansion and new stuff. It would be to keep the thing running, right? Something that I believe and some progressive groups have pushed on in the California legislature, not with a lot of success, unfortunately, is the idea that perhaps instead of just being a sales tax, maybe it could be a business tax instead, or at least partially a business tax, right? Because sales taxes are regressive taxes. That means they hit harder for people of lower income. And there's an argument to be made that lower income people are more likely to use public transit, and that it kind of makes sense in a way if they pay for it. I understand that argument and where it's coming from, but I also think, corporations, especially, big tech companies, creative industries that we have here in San Francisco, they benefit a lot from having a good public transit system, that can move their usually young, moving out for a new office job workforce, to the office. And so I don't know. I mean, it really feels like it should be a collective effort in that sense, but I also just really want the system to at least stay alive, and I'm kind of willing to take whatever tax they think would work out best, And ultimately, another big problem is just that, the Trump administration is incredibly hostile to, federal funding of any public transit, really, especially in a Democrat-run state. They've cut funding to the California high-speed rail. They've cut off funding to New York for a rail tunnel they're doing connecting New York City and New Jersey. So, yeah, ultimately, if we want to make big change, like, it needs to happen in terms of elections at the state, local, federal level, right? Because that really, I mean, this takes me to the last part and, like, talking about Caltrain again, right? Because in 2024, the Caltrain, like a couple of years before, I believe, it was approved by the voters in the areas where the Caltrain goes to basically do a little sales tax to spend the money on upgrading the Caltrain from diesel trains to electric trains, right? And so obviously that makes a huge difference in terms of reducing the emissions, right? But in addition, electric trains can accelerate and decelerate, they can accelerate a lot faster between every stop. And so covering the same distance from San Jose to San Francisco, this new electric train was 23 minutes shorter on the journey, I believe, taking it down to like 50 minutes from like an hour and 15 or something, right? And so, not to mention also these new electric trains are really fantastic. They're the same trains they use in Zurich, which, anybody who's kind of plugged in knows, like, Switzerland is the global standard for having really good, comfortable, fantastic public transit. And so it's the same trains. There's a bathroom on the train. There's electric outlets. There's plenty of seats, and they're comfortable. BART doesn't have a lot of seats, and it doesn't have a restroom. Even though like some of its journeys could be as long as an hour and a half long. What if you have to pee, right? Yeah. So the point is that when this investment was made on getting new trains, electrifying the system, making it faster, it has led to massive increases in ridership, right? Specifically, weekend services used to be only every 1 hour on the slower diesel train. With the new investment, they made it every 30 minutes on the faster electric train, and weekend ridership. So people not even going to work, people just going to see a friend or to see a movie or whatever it may be. Like that ridership has more than doubled, like sometimes surpassing pre-pandemic levels. So to me, that's just like a really clear sign from across the pond. This is also an area that's being affected by the work from home policies of people staying home, not returning to the office, lower ridership. Like the current Caltrain ridership is still lower than pre-pandemic levels. But unlike BART, which is hemorrhaging and on the verge of failure, this investment has like spurred a lot of new people into the system and breathe life into it. And I really enjoy riding it. That's also another part of it. And so, yeah, I think the bigger question is we need to eventually get to a place where the federal government can coordinate like a Green New Deal. Obviously, that covers like a green energy transition in like many parts of our economy outside of public transit. But we should really be able to have like clean, efficient, if we're the wealthiest country in the world, like why can't we have like decent public transit systems like other countries have? And so ultimately, like that needs to be a part of a wider agenda to make the economy more equitable, make our industries more efficient, and fight the threat of climate change. Like it is crazy right now. Like I am recording this at a time when like we're at war with Iran. Trump is overthrowing the Constitution. BART is, I admit, like a pretty small thing compared to all of those. But like we really need to get back to a place where like as a country we can focus on like this stuff, like the stuff we need to do to make everyday people's lives better instead of bombing innocent children. Yeah.
Or there's other options to cut that level of money from a high fixed rail system. You have to make a lot of cuts.
These cuts would have serious impacts on riders, especially this group of disabled people that ride together to the North Concord station.
And that's my only transportation for where I live at right now. I can't just not have that.
It's not fair, especially for the disabled adults that don't have no transportation. We rely on the train and the bus.
The closures would be life-changing for many.
If I lost this station, I probably would have to change jobs, so it would affect me drastically.
Wow.
I wouldn't be able to make the commute every day.
And it's already a long commute.
Yeah, it's already a long commute, but BART makes it doable for me.
And the cuts would completely change what the BART system looks like.
By cutting those officers and cleaners and maintenance workers, we're going to go back to a time that I don't want to revisit.
Because if riders leave, it will be unsustainable. And then the conversation is not going to be about which communities do and don't have stations. It's going to be about how we have to adapt to a Bay Area with no BART.